Content warning. This video contains mentions of sexism, sexual assaults, and other topics that could be potentially triggering to those who have been victims of these horrid crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. August 20th, 2023. Spain beats England 1-0 in Sydney, Australia to win the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup. Olga Carmona, a left-back who played with Real Madrid at the time, scored the only goal of the final in the 29th minute to complete Spain's meteoric rise to the top of the women's footballing world. Spain qualified for their first Women's World Cup not even 8 years prior, getting knocked out in the group stage of the 2015 World Cup in Canada with just a single point to their name. And at the 2019 World Cup in France, they were knocked out in the round of 16 by no other than four-time champions, the United States. We look at the Spain team of today and easily call them one of, if not the best, women's international team in the sport, but that was hardly the case on the international level going into the 2023 Women's World Cup. Going into this tournament, Spain had plenty of world-class talent, but they hardly had the silverware to prove it. Make no mistake, this was a simply gargantuan accomplishment for women's football in Spain, and it set the game on a completely new trajectory for the country, the continent, and the world as a whole. Countries from all around Europe began pouring more money than they had ever poured before into women's football because they saw what happens when women's football is invested into by a nation like Spain. Yet, despite all of this, a dark truth remained under the surface of Spain's World Cup riches. Well, except it wasn't underneath the surface at all. That much was evident in the scenes of Spain's success following the 2023 Women's World Cup final. Following Olga Carmona's goal in the 29th minute of the 2023 final, manager at the time of the Spain's women's national team, Jorge Vilda, was caught on camera hugging a female assistant before moving his hand lower to grope her breast. Vilda had been under fire by the Spanish women's national team for years before the Women's World Cup for his allegedly abusive behavior towards the team's players. In 2022, Vilda refused to resign from the national team leading into the World Cup, and even had full backing by the Royal Spanish Football Federation, RFEF, the governing body of Spanish football. A number of players within the Spanish women's national team arranged a boycott against the national team in protest of Vilda's abusive treatment, which caused this group of brave women to be titled Las Quince, or the 15. Following Vilda's refusal to resign from the national team, he did not call up any of Las Quince to the following Spain matches, yet 13 of them defiantly returned for the team's trip to Australia and New Zealand in 2023. To call Vilda's actions despicable is a complete understatement to the game, and yet he continues to manage to this day as he manages the Moroccan women's national team, who are currently competing at the 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations, also known as WAFCON. More on that in a moment. But the most morbid and most reported upon moment of this whole affair came following the match in Sydney, where Luis Rubiales, president of the RFEF, kissed Jenny Hermoso on the lips without her consent on live television. These two horrific moments encapsulated the darkest side of women's football and women in sports as a whole. That two horrible acts committed by despicable men in positions of power over women overshadowed the meteoric rise of this Spanish national team in the biggest moment of these players' lives. These events sparked a movement across the sport to remove Rubiales and Vilda from power, one that was, as previously mentioned, partially successful. I promise we will get to the topic of this video in a minute, just stick with me here. Rubiales had been removed from power and charged for his crimes, but Jorge Vilda still remains as a manager for the Moroccan women's national team to this day. Amidst all of this, one extremely vocal ally of the women's national team was men's national team player Borja Iglesias, who stated that he would refuse any and all call-ups to the men's national team for Spain for as long as Rubiales remained in power. Borja Iglesias is a striker that has played essentially his entire career in Spain, with 6 years for Real Betis. Throughout his career, Iglesias has been extremely vocal as an advocate for women's football and human rights as a whole, including publicly denouncing the genocide in Gaza and advocating for improved human rights around the globe. However, Iglesias also stated in his post denouncing Rubiales that he acknowledged the unlikelihood that he would be called into the Spanish national team anytime soon, having only 2 caps for Spain at the time of posting. It was certainly unlikely and unthought of before the announcement of rosters going into the 2026 Men's World Cup in North America that Iglesias would be chosen, but his statement still proved a powerful testament against Rubiales, Vilda, and the male-dominated world of football. For the 2025-2026 season, Iglesias returned to Celta Vigo, the club where he essentially began his professional career, and bagged a squad-best 11 goals during the 2025-26 La Liga season, earning him a call-up to the 2026 World Cup team for Spain. The rest is history. In Spain's run to the finals in New Jersey, they beat France in a 2-0 victory in Dallas, Texas, where he and Jenny Hermoso embraced in a hug following their victory over France that sent them to the final. Jenny Hermoso was working the game as a pundit for El Nueve, a studio based in Buenos Aires. The moment has since went viral and showed exactly how men can be better allies to the women's game as a whole. Iglesias played only a single minute at the 2026 World Cup, but his impact off the pitch was far more important. Through Spanish manager Luis de la Fuente including Iglesias in the squad, he exhibited Spain's devotion to advocating for the women's game and kicking the behavior of Rubiales and Vilda out of the sport on the biggest stage forever. Directly following the 2026 World Cup in North America, the 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations, also known as WAFCON, was set to take place on July 26, 2026, in Morocco, making it the first major international tournament following the Men's World Cup. Yet still, sitting beneath this triumphant and important tournament for the women's game, for a continent that rarely gets any recognition whatsoever on the global stage, a dark truth has lingered beneath the surface. I recount the events of the Spanish women's national team, Rubiales and Borja Iglesias, at the 2026 World Cup in such detail to provide some context for what is to come. Despite its importance as a Women's World Cup qualifier for 2027, WAFCON has been utterly shameful so far for its lack of broadcasting, coverage, and care given to the women's sport whatsoever by the Confederation of African Football, also known as CAF. The tournament, which I previously mentioned is taking place in Morocco, was originally supposed to take place all the way back in March of this year. For reasons still not made known to the public, WAFCON was delayed at the last possible second, just 2 weeks before the tournament was set to begin. Before the eventual delaying of the tournament, CAF president Patrice Motsepe stated in an interview that the date of the tournament could not be changed because it counted as a FIFA Women's World Cup qualifier. Only for CAF to delay the tournament by 4 months just a short while later. So, a lot of good that statement did. Additionally, the tournament has struggled to find broadcasting or advertising partners of any kind, dramatically stunting the potential for any sort of exposure going into this tournament, which, speaking of, the attendances for these games have been extremely low. This is a fact. What is not a fact, however, is the opinion that has seemingly sprouted in online football spaces that the low attendances prove that nobody cares about women's sports or that the women's game is in some way inferior to the men's. This completely misinformed narrative also completely misses the part where just 4 years prior, Morocco, the same country that is hosting this WAFCON, set an attendance record for WAFCON 2022 with 45,000 fans attending the final between Nigeria and Morocco. The extremely sad reality of this situation is that CAF effectively shot this tournament in both feet, broke both of its legs at the knees, and left this tournament completely out to dry from the start, leading to a complete lack of awareness for the tournament in any capacity for the average footballing fan. This issue has only been further exacerbated when ESPN's women's sports account posted pictures of the attendances at WAFCON, including a crying emoji and highlighting the lack of attendance at the games so far. The comments underneath these posts are abhorrent and absolutely despicable, so I will not show any of them at all whatsoever, but just know that, should you want to see it for whatever reason, it is the most sexist and racist shit you will ever see in your entire life. So be warned. And yet, the ironic part about this post is that ESPN could have easily gained the broadcasting rights for this tournament in America, with the tournament only being viewable on beIN Sports' notoriously horrible streaming. Despite all of the eyes in the world being on the international game because of the 2026 World Cup, CAF completely lacked the effort to advertise this tournament and turn any of the eyes of the continent and the eyes of the globe towards it, something that is extremely disheartening. You would think any international tournament, men's or women's, directly following a World Cup that piqued as much global interest as the 2026 World Cup would be an absolute no-brainer for any broadcaster or advertising company. Yet the tournament has seen virtually no investment on any of those fronts, with the low attendances being just a single symptom of the dark disease that continues to infect the beautiful sport we all know and love. The same dark disease that once plagued teams like Spain continues to parasitically infect the most neglected continent on the globe from a footballing perspective, both literally and metaphorically. In the same way that Spain once had a team of extremely talented individuals handicapped by utterly disgraceful and abusive behavior, so too are the teams of 2026's WAFCON in Morocco, handicapped by the neglect and disgraceful behavior of their confederation towards women's football. All of these teams display the same symptoms, but 3 players highlight this more than any other at the tournament: Zambia's Barbara Banda and Malawi's Temwa and Tabitha Shuinga. We will first focus on Barbara Banda and the horrid abuse unjustly hurled towards her, and how that embodies both the racism and sexism shown towards the women's game in Africa, before focusing on the electric duo of the Chewinga sisters and Malawi's remarkable rise in African football, as well as the hope they symbolize for the women's game in Africa going forward. Barbara Banda is unarguably one of the best players in women's football at the moment. Her performances in the National Women's Soccer League with Orlando Pride have been enough to see her consistently named as a top 3 player in the league, if not the best in the league. Barbara Banda was not only nominated for the Ballon d'Or in 2024, she was also named BBC's Women's Footballer of the Year, nominated for the NWSL MVP award, and she was also named the 2024 NWSL Championship Final MVP for her goal that sealed Orlando Pride's first ever NWSL championship. She also won the NWSL Shield with Orlando that season, the trophy that's given to the best performers throughout the NWSL regular season. Oh, and she has the fastest hat trick recorded in NWSL history, where she scored 3 goals in 38 minutes against the Utah Royals in 2025. So there's that. An absolute master of positioning and finishing ability, Barbara Banda's stamina and ability to get in behind defenses makes her one of the most dangerous attacking players in the game, and it's very clear to see why she's considered one of the best in the world. In addition, she has also been a significant part of Zambia's success on the global stage in women's football. She was even a part of Zambia's first ever Women's World Cup squad in 2023 as a result, but her story is not without tribulation. In July of 2022, Barbara Banda and 3 of her Zambia teammates, including Madrid Club de Futbol Femenino striker and current Bay FC striker Rachel Kundananji, were denied permission to compete with Zambia in their 2022 WAFCON tournament that would be used as a qualifier for WAFCON teams to make it into the 2023 Women's World Cup. Shortly before the tournament, Banda and Kundanji were barred from playing due to a gender verification test required by CAF that found their testosterone levels were higher than the threshold allowed to compete in women's football. I shit you not. This entire situation quickly blew up preceding the tournament. Zambia would go on to place 3rd at the tournament, their best ever finish, and qualify for their first ever Women's World Cup in 2023, but the situation surrounding these players before the start of the tournament left a permanent stain on CAF as a governing body of the women's game in Africa, and it exhibited the discrimination that African female athletes often face on the global stage. At the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, 2 sprinters representing Namibia in the 400-meter were barred by the Olympic Committee for the same reason, and South African runner Caster Semenya had faced over a decade of scrutiny and questioning of her own testosterone levels following gold medals in the women's 800-meter at both the 2012 and 2016 Olympics. In addition to the invasive tests that often discriminate against and seek to humiliate female athletes, Barbara Banda has also faced online harassment since joining Orlando Pride in the NWSL in 2024. In a year of political turmoil for women's sports following the results of the 2024 election in the United States, where President-elect Donald Trump and other politicians repeatedly used transgender women competing in women's sports as a fear tactic against transgender people, Barbara Banda faced a wave of online harassment surrounding her test results before the 2022 WAFCON from none other than once famed children's author, now infamous bigot and transphobe, J.K. Rowling, who implied in a post on X that Barbara was male. What Rowling and her mold-infested brain fail to realize, however, is that FIFA ruled their own testosterone testing process to be outdated, and the system was completely reworked before the Women's World Cup in 2023, which is what allowed Barbara Banda to play during Zambia's first ever World Cup. Additionally, as an Athletic article focusing on J.K. Rowling's post aptly points out, Barbara Banda is a cisgender woman. As Meg Linehan writes, despite the misinformation that has been spread about her and her eligibility to play for the Zambia women's national team, Banda has never broken any rules set by world governing body FIFA, CAF, or the NWSL. And yet, the hateful, bitter, pathetic, and disgusting hate campaign against transgender people by J.K. Rowling and transphobes around the globe has once again caught unsuspecting women of color in the crossfire of their vitriol. An article published by the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, NSVRC, in March of 2023 highlights the correlation between racism and transphobia by stating that transphobia is a product of white supremacy and colonialism, which rely on a strict gender binary. White supremacy culture is upheld by an imagined and imposed superiority of white, cisgender, heterosexual masculinity. The article then links an article by them, an LGBTQ news source that highlighted the effect anti-trans sports bills have had on women of color specifically. The article focuses on the case of Terry Miller, a transgender athlete, and her fight against anti-trans sports bills. Miller stated that there is a long history of excluding black girls from sports and policing our bodies, something that laws such as these would continue to push for with invasive testing procedures. The article states that black women in sports, whether cis, trans, or intersex, consistently encounter moving goalposts and shifting expectations as a consequence of their own success. Included in this statement, writer Derek Clifton also remarks that this culture leads people to making cruel remarks about women of color and their perceived femininity, and that it creates a racist depiction of their physicality in a cruel attempt to exclude women of color from participating in sports and ultimately winning. Barbara Banda's story is extremely important in the context of WAFCON 2026 to highlight the inherent disadvantage that successful women of color face in the women's sporting world and in society as a whole due to racism. The articles I included also highlight the inherent racism within the false accusation made by J.K. Rowling. Barbara Banda is a cisgender woman, and her physicality would likely not have been questioned by Rowling were she not a woman of color. I see no tweets by Rowling whatsoever accusing, say, Aitana Bonmati, Alexia Putellas, or Alex Morgan of being quote-unquote male. She focused on Banda because her transphobic worldview is also inherently racist. Her and those like hers attempt to police women's appearances in her pathetic crusade against a group of people less than 1% of the world's population continuously catches women of color in the crossfire because these views are inherently racist. While editing this video, I've come across multiple sources that have reported that Barbara Banda actually never took the testosterone level tests that have been referenced by J.K. Rowling and other sources. Sources seem to be conflicting about this, but it does seem as though a false narrative has sprung up surrounding Banda's omission from WAFCON 2022. I would like to say, though, I think my point still remains mostly unchanged. Barbara Banda was targeted by a false narrative based in transphobia that caught her in the crossfires because of the inherent racism present within transphobia. CAF did an extremely poor job handling the situation and protecting their player following these reports and false claims, which is what led this narrative to stick around almost 2 years later, giving Rowling a false narrative to build in her racist and transphobic rhetoric. That much is clear regardless of the validity of any of these sources. I just thought I'd fact check myself before I let this get out of hand and, further spread this false narrative. But I still think my point remains pretty much the same. They police the bodies of women in such a way that any expression of a woman's body that doesn't fit within the strictly cisgender, white, Eurocentric perspective of gender is seen as an affront to their imagined necessity for a strict gender binary. As such, black female football players are far more likely to face harassment for their bodies, for playing in general, and most of all, for winning. These strict binaries create a disparity in the visibility of women of color in sports, often discouraging them from competing to begin with and providing them extremely little visibility. This same lack of visibility is what has caused this WAFCON tournament to receive such misinformed and hateful criticism. It's not that the people of Morocco don't care about women's football. It's not that the global football fans don't care about women's football in Africa. It's not because nobody would watch these games were they to be properly advertised, marketed, streamed, or televised. It's the inherent link between sexism, transphobia, racism, and all forms of bigotry inherent within our society that have given the tournament such little visibility that most people don't even have a way to view this tournament. That being said, WAFCON's perception in online spaces has also been categorically misunderstood. Football isn't about attendance numbers or marketing or streaming numbers. Although providing fans and viewers with ways to easily access matches is important and should be a focus of this tournament, football is about the game played between 22 people on a pitch with a ball and 2 goals. It's about the stories off the field a lot of the time, but WAFCON has plenty of amazing stories taking place on the pitch that gives some hope to the women's game in Africa. Despite the lack of coverage and exposure for this tournament, despite all of the bad and ugly at this tournament, and despite the hatred and ignorance of the public towards women's football in Africa, plenty of rays of hope have shined through to provide something of a spotlight for those willing to shine the brightest in Morocco. Barbara Banda had an amazing tournament at WAFCON, despite Zambia's early exit in the group stage, thanks to a group stage format that has been done away with in every confederation in the world of football. Unfortunately, I do feel as though I need to address this. Barbara Banda seemed to be carrying the entire weight of her nation on her shoulders going into this WAFCON. The controversy provided by ignorance by J.K. Rowling and others unfortunately did nothing to lift any of this weight off of Barbara Banda's shoulders, and that is not to say that Barbara Banda is the only good player on Zambia's team. In fact, that statement is just completely invalid because of the quality of Bay FC winger Rachel Kundananji, Angel City FC winger Prisha Chilufya, and a former teammate of Barbara Banda's at Orlando Pride, Grace Chanda. Yet Banda was involved in 6 out of 8 of Zambia's goals this tournament, providing 5 goals and a solitary assist to make up 75% of Zambia's goal count. Yet, Zambia were sent packing home from Morocco early on the final day of the group stage when Nigeria beat Egypt, drawing them level on points, which would see Nigeria go through to the knockout stage due to the head-to-head round-robin format in which Nigeria's previous victory over Zambia in the previous match day provided them the tiebreaker in this draw. Despite allowing the joint least number of goals in the group stage of this tournament, 2, tied with Cameroon and Ghana, and scoring 8 goals, giving them the joint most goals in this tournament in the group stage, tied with the Ivory Coast, and the single largest goal differential from the group stage of this tournament, Zambia were sent packing early, sending arguably your biggest player home, along with the darlings of the previous tournament who defied all odds to qualify for the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand in favor of a head-to-head system that is scarcely used by any competition across global football in both men's and women's football, I think tells you all that you need to know about why such a format is not used in global football anymore. Look, ultimately, this format was established well before the beginning of this tournament, meaning Zambia essentially dug their own grave in their loss to Nigeria on match day 2, but it is still at least a bit sad that one of the darlings of women's football in Africa had to be sent packing so soon despite 2 performances that would have gotten them through to the knockout stages in any other tournament. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. Anyways, the hosts Morocco managed to top Group A and draw in some of the largest attendance figures in WAFCON history while hosting the tournament for a 3rd straight time. Morocco would ultimately go on to finish 4th in the tournament, losing the 3rd place match to Algeria on penalties after drawing 1-1 through extra time. Speaking of Algeria managed to grab the bronze medal and qualify for the 2027 World Cup in Brazil. This was Algeria's best ever performance on the international level in a major continental tournament, and it managed to qualify them for their first ever Women's World Cup in doing so. The nation that captured the heart of a town so near and dear to my heart in Lawrence, Kansas, where I attended 4 years at the University of Kansas, go Jayhawks, has continued to win my heart time and time again, and they are definitely one of the biggest winners from this tournament. And of course, the now champions Cameroon have had one of the most interesting stories in this entire tournament. Upon completing qualifying for WAFCON 2026, Cameroon actually didn't qualify for this tournament. Let me explain. WAFCON 2026 qualifying consisted of 2 rounds of qualifying playoffs with home and away legs. Cameroon, however, are ranked number 69 in FIFA's women's national team world ranking, making them the 5th highest ranked team amongst African teams, not including the already qualified hosts of Morocco. The 6 highest ranking nations, excluding the host nation, of course, directly qualified for the 2nd round of qualifying. However, Cameroon would face a rather intimidating opponent in their 2nd round matchup against number 84 ranked Algeria. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, Algeria would go on to win 3rd place at this tournament, but in the first leg of this match, Algeria would come out swinging as Servette FC midfielder Gautier Karchouni and Bristol City winger Marine Defeu scored in a 2-1 home leg against Cameroon. Going into Cameroon's home leg, things did not look very promising for Cameroon, who seemed to lack a certain something to prevent Algeria's attacks. Those same flaws became apparent in the 23rd minute of the second leg, where Marine Defeu scored again to eliminate Cameroon and send Algeria to WAFCON 2026. Except, how did Cameroon manage to get into this tournament and win it despite losing in qualifying? Well, I'm glad you asked, because CAF expanded the amount of teams in WAFCON from 12 to 16, which saw the next 4 highest-ranked teams in FIFA's women's national team ranking qualify for WAFCON under this new expanded format. Cameroon was ranked highest amongst these 4, which included number 71 Ivory Coast, number 79 Mali, and number 95 Egypt. The rest, of course, is history for Cameroon. Cameroon would go on to thrash Malawi 3-0 in the final to win their first ever WAFCON title without losing a single game. Their inclusion may seem lucky, but Cameroon proved everybody wrong when they beat the hosts Morocco in the semi-final on penalties to get a matchup in the final with this tournament's sweethearts, Malawi, which, speaking of, I feel like we have to talk about Malawi. It's the Chewinga Sisters world, folks. We're all just living in it. Malawi went into this tournament ranked at number 153 in FIFA's women's national team rankings, by far the lowest ranked team at this tournament. Yet, these plucky underdogs had a perfect pairing of a secret weapon in their arsenal. When matchday number 1 rolled around, it was number 36 Nigeria up against number 153 Malawi. If you've been watching international football for as long as I have, you would know that those numbers typically provide such a wide gap in quality in the world of football. In men's football, that is the same difference from what separates a team like Poland, number 36, from a team like the Solomon Islands. The same difference of 117 places in FIFA's world ranking separates number 1 Spain from fellow WAFCON competitors, number 118 Burkina Faso. Despite all the odds, Malawi managed a simply inspiring performance against the Eagles of Nigeria in a 3-2 upset. Could you ever imagine Poland losing to the Solomon Islands? How about Spain's women's team losing to Burkina Faso? Could you imagine number 1 ranked Spain's men's team losing to number 118 ranked Indonesia? I mean, for any Asian football sickos in the chat, you all know that hell would have to freeze over for Indonesia to beat any heavyweight in Asia, let alone the current holders of the World Cup. Suffice to say, Malawi's victory in this match sent a shockwave across the world of women's football, and it illustrated the meteoric and rapid rise of women's football in Malawi and in Africa as a whole. Just as Zambia had managed to shock the world and qualify for their first ever World Cup at WAFCON 2022, Malawi too would become a force that shocked the world and shined a spotlight on the rising quality of women's football in Africa. Of course, the 2 players that led this charge were none other than the Chewinga sisters. Temwa Chewinga is one of the best forwards in the world, and she showed just as much in Malawi's first matchup against Nigeria by scoring twice in the 73rd minute and in the 5th minute of second half stoppage time to seal Malawi's victory over Nigeria and to prevent a late comeback with Nigeria's 2 goals scored in second half stoppage time. Temwa Chewinga, a forward who has won back-to-back NWSL MVP awards and back-to-back Golden Boots with the Kansas City Current, proved herself a force to be reckoned with, but it seems hard to talk about her at this WAFCON without also talking about her sister, Tabitha Chewinga, who also scored in Malawi's victory over Nigeria in the 79th minute. Despite their collective brilliance at this tournament, 2 players don't make up the whole of a team. If Malawi wanted to make it far in this tournament, they needed more brilliance from the whole of their starting 11, which is exactly what happened on matchday number 2. Matchday number 2 saw Malawi matched up against number 99 ranked Egypt, with a spot in the knockout rounds on the line. If the match against Nigeria was about the Chewinga sisters and their impact on women's football in Malawi, this second match was about the resilience of Malawi as a whole. That much became clear when Montpellier winger Rose Kadzere scored the opening goal in the 35th minute of this match to give Malawi the lead. The Chewinga sisters rightfully get lots of credit for the rise in Malawi's attacking prowess, but Rose Kadzere perhaps deserves just as many plaudits for her sensational performances in Malawi's run to the finals. She provided 2 goals and an assist throughout this tournament, including a goal and an assist in the match against Egypt. Because of her star power, Chawinga's equally good performance in this match of a goal and an assist caught all of the headlines in this one. However, Kadzere's performance arguably deserved more headlines in this match. Kadzere has struggled to find consistency in her now 2-season stint at French side Montpellier, only providing 6 goals and 3 assists across 35 matches, but she illustrated to any club willing to watch that she can provide so much more when put into a strong attack like Malawi's. Kadzere showed that Malawi not only has star power, but that they also have a plethora of young, hungry players waiting to make their mark on the global stage. Malawi's rise in quality on the youth level was also evident in 19-year-old BK Häcken midfielder Faith Chinzimu, who also found the back of the net in the 2nd minute of first half stoppage time. Chinzimu, already a UEFA Women's Europa Cup champion with Swedish side BK Häcken at just the age of 19 years old, quietly had a sensational tournament in Morocco, exhibiting a versatility found very rarely from players of her age as she ranged from defense to attacking midfield. Because of this, her goal contributions perhaps told a different story to her quality on the field, with just a goal and an assist to her name throughout the tournament. Regardless, Chinzimu's chance creation from anywhere on the field and her ability to get forward when needed illustrates a range of versatility that is rather impressive. I would have to hope that Chinzimu will soon be seeing offers from Premier League or NWSL sides in the near future. She seems a no-brainer for any team looking for a versatile midfielder capable of filling in wherever they are needed. Malawi would go on to win the matchup against Egypt 3-1, finishing the match down to 10 players when centre-back Rose Alufandika was sent off in the 52nd minute. Temwa Chawinga scored yet again in the 68th minute to make it 3-0 before Egypt found one back in the 71st minute with a goal from Eman Kassem off the bench. Their final match of the group stage would see Malawi go up against a team that had done what they were doing at this tournament just 4 years prior, Zambia. However, a first-half defensive collapse against star forward Barbara Banda in the 2nd minute and Angel City FC winger Prisha Chilufya in the 37th minute would prove fatal for Malawi, as Tabitha Chawinga's 72nd minute goal would only end up being a consolation in Malawi's 2-1 loss to Zambia. This match showed that Malawi still had some way to go, but that they weren't too far behind the quality of a team as impressive as Zambia. The match would highlight defensive issues that would continue to haunt Malawi throughout this tournament, but it also showed that their quality could still shine through the cracks in the foundation. Zambia, as previously mentioned, would unfortunately go home despite this victory. However, Malawi managed to squeeze through based on head-to-head performances and give themselves a matchup with number 60 ranked Ghana in the quarterfinals. Those defensive cracks would begin to show once again as Ghana would score the opening goal of this match in just the 7th minute, with Nottingham Forest winger Chantel Boye Elorka scoring for Ghana. I am butchering the names in this video. I am so sorry. However, Malawi's resilience would not be extinguished so easily, as the star woman Temwa Chawinga would score once again just 5 minutes later in the 12th minute to draw things level. Rose Kadzere would once again show her potential for stardom by providing the winning goal for Malawi in the 79th minute, completing an impressive and resilient comeback for Malawi over a team 93 places ahead of them in FIFA's women's national team ranking. And of course, additionally, their victory would qualify them directly for the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil, the first ever in the team's history. Next up for Malawi would be a matchup with number 74 ranked Algeria in the semifinals, with a spot in the finals on the line. And the first half was all Malawi. After St. Malo fullback Morgan Belkiter was sent off in the 23rd minute of this match, Algeria's defense inevitably caved to the might of the Chawinga sisters as Tabitha Chawinga scored the opener in the 33rd minute, and Temwa Chawinga scored Malawi's second in the 1st minute of first half stoppage time. Things did not go entirely to plan, however, for Malawi, as Rose Kadzere would sadly get herself sent off in the 8th minute of first half stoppage time to make this a 10v10 matchup for the second half. Despite a goal in the 60th minute by Le Havre forward Ikram Ajabi for Algeria, Tabitha Chawinga would provide the finishing blow in the 76th minute to finish this match, Algeria 1, Malawi 3. Malawi had extremely high hopes going into the final against Cameroon, but those hopes would be crushed in the end as Cameroon waltzed through Malawi's defensive cracks with 3 first-half goals. Seemingly, the red card to Rose Kazere in the game before would prove a fatal blow for Malawi's attack, as they did not score a single goal in this matchup. Marie Nga would grab 2 in the 20th minute and the 3rd minute of first half stoppage time for Cameroon, and PSG winger Naomi Eto'o would grab one of her own in the 29th minute for a simply dominant victory. Despite their loss in the final, Malawi's national team at WAFCON 2026 has been inspirational to watch. Although they do struggle defensively at times, Malawi has succeeded astronomically going forward with arguably the best sibling duo in the history of the sport. Temwa and Tabitha Chawinga together are a simply inspiring pair. They have both been vocal that their mother didn't want them to play football growing up, but that their passion won her over and made them the players that they are today. Their agility, positioning, ability to get in behind backlines, and their finishing ability have all been the X factor for Malawi, and their story is one that should inspire girls from all across Africa and encouraging them to play the beautiful game, even when others say that you shouldn't. It evokes much of the same feelings that Zambia's rise in 2022 and 2023 brought in showing that women's football is truly growing at a faster rate than we could have ever imagined on a global scale. It has also shown the immense potential of Africa in producing some of the best talents in the world in the form of Temwa Chawinga, Tabitha Chawinga, Barbara Banda, and a plethora of promising youngsters just waiting for their chance to shine on the global stage. Yet it is impossible to ignore the dark side hidden underneath this tournament. Morocco's success at this tournament has been overshadowed by the gross negligence of CAF and the Moroccan FA in terms of scheduling and contempt for women's football. This is only further highlighted by the fact that Morocco's team is being led by Jorge Vilda, the same manager who managed Spain at the 2023 Women's World Cup and groped a female assistant on live television during the final, and the same manager who was protested by his own players for his abusive behavior behind the scenes. I told you we'd get there eventually. In a time where sexism in the sport of football is a continuous conversation with no end in sight, male players from around the globe should be doing their best to provide a spotlight for the women's teams when they have their chance. Yet, for every Borja Iglesias, there too is a Mason Greenwood. Mason Greenwood has an unbelievable amount of evidence against him that he abused and sexually assaulted his own partner when he was playing for Manchester United. Yet he still was given chances by Spanish team Getafe, French team Olympique Marseille, and now Turkish giants Fenerbahce. There too is also players like Rafael Leao posting about how women can stop pretending to know about football now that the World Cup is over. Oh, Rafael, we gotta beat your ass. I have no words. Regardless, the women's game is continuing to grow at a pace that has never been seen in the history of the beautiful game. It's not just growing in Spain, in England, in Europe, and in North America. It's growing everywhere. And nowhere is that more evident than in WAFCON right now. However, the job is far from done. Just like Spain was, CAF women's football continues to be overshadowed by men in power neglecting the well-being and exposure of women in the beautiful game. This tournament has so much world-class talent just waiting to be discovered by scouts, by fans, and by the world. Every single game has a headline of some sort, and every team has a story to tell. The resilience of these players to play at this tournament despite the delays, the horrid scheduling, and the complete neglect in global exposure is immensely inspiring, and every woman on that field should feel proud. During the writing of this video, even further damning reports against CAF have come to light as the executive committee of CAF has unanimously reconfirmed its support for FIFA president Gianni Infantino per a report posted by Rob Harris. Look, if I wanted to list all of the reasons why Gianni Infantino is one of the most evil men on this planet, I would have to make an entirely separate video at that point. It's a little bit of a dead horse overbeaten at this point, but perhaps I will make a video on it at some point if you leave a like and subscribe. Regardless, to say that Gianni Infantino's reign as the president of FIFA has been disastrous for the global game and the globe in general is simply an understatement. I fear if I go too long, I'm going to lose track of what this video should truly be about. But from attempting to financialize the global game through a subsidiary company that he would indefinitely remain in charge of, to attempting to get delegates of Palestine to shake hands with an Israeli delegate at a FIFA summit, an attempt that went extremely poorly at that, to the clear as daylight breach of FIFA's political neutrality rule, where Infantino made up arbitrarily a peace prize that he gave to United States President Donald Trump, a man who continues to threaten war with any country that dares question him and his fascist attempts at modern imperialism. It's fair to say that Infantino is about as spineless and disgusting as men in power come. Additionally, Infantino's now failed plans to commercialize the global sport put women's football in an extremely precarious situation. Following Infantino and FIFA's announcement of their plans, UEFA, the governing body of European football, denounced the move and stated that they would boycott any and all tournaments until these plans were cancelled. With the Women's World Cup set to take place just next year in 2027, Infantino's gamble for even more money put straight into his pocket and the pockets of corrupt men in power put the tournament into question over how it would take shape were the nations of Europe to follow through with their boycott. In the fallout of the reversing of this announcement, Infantino is now having his power as president of FIFA questioned not only by the members of FIFA and every footballer alive, but also by governments and people from around the globe. CAF endorsing Gianni Infantino is extremely disgusting and disappointing, but it is unfortunately far from a surprise. The current president of CAF, Patrice Motsepe, has no shortage of common interests with Gianni Infantino and his beloved his friends. At a World Economic Forum in 2020, Patrice Motsepe publicly stated to the US President Donald Trump that Africa, quote, loves him, a statement he was forced to walk back after rightfully being called out on this statement. Donald Trump has waged war against foreign policy and policies that aid the countries of Africa since stepping into office in 2016, yet Motsepe's economic interests know no bounds in terms of the amount of boots that must be licked to line his pockets with some more cash. This also comes after some reports suggested that Infantino was offering the World Cup final in 2030, set to take place between Morocco, Spain, and Portugal, to Morocco in exchange for the continent's support for his presidency. These reports have since been denied by FIFA, but it is certainly not something that many people would be willing to put past a man like Infantino so quickly, and it is certainly not something one would easily put past Motsepe in his quest to lick the boots of the most powerful men possible. Regardless, CAF's kneeling towards Infantino is one that certainly does not instill confidence in the current state of the Confederation, and it particularly brings further to light the neglectful treatment towards women's football in Africa that they would kneel to a man who would so willingly put such a major competition in women's football as the World Cup on the line to potentially put more money in his pockets. Every female athlete faces a moment in their lives where they are told by someone with authority that they can't play. Whether it's a group of boys not wanting to play pickup with the girl at their school, a trans athlete like Terry Miller going against the rhetoric of an entire regime, or two sisters defying their mother and playing the game that they love so much, every girl deserves a chance to grow up inspired and empowered by female athletes on the biggest stages possible. But a stage is only so much use when the spotlight you shine on it is so dim. I hope that someday, in the near future, as enough women and allies raise their voices for those in the high tower to hear, that the spotlight will grow brighter than it ever has before. As I typically tend to do, I will end this video with a call to action. Content creators, journalists, pundits, teams, players, fans, continue to support women's football in whatever ways you can. Bring somebody to their first game. Ask a pub to put on the game when your local team plays. Follow the scorelines as closely as possible even when you aren't able to watch the games. Continue to grow your awareness of women's football and promote it to those who know little about it. Women, specifically white women and women of power, push like hell to get women's soccer in underexposed parts of the globe, such as Africa, more exposed on the global level. Be like my absolute queen from the Kansas City Current. Investing on home soil in facilities, stadiums, and big money signings only gets you so far. Invest in women's football on a larger scale. For all you know, the next Shawinga or Banda could be at this WAFCON, and you don't even know it. Don't let the lack of coverage prohibit you from supporting in whatever way you can. Raise awareness, get more eyes on women's football as a whole. We all have a part to play in growing the sport, and we all have something we can do to empower those who are the most discriminated against. Thank you for watching.